It all started on a quiet Thursday evening, the kind where nothing seems out of place, until suddenly, everything changes. David had always thought his life was simple but stable. He worked hard, came home on time, and did everything he could to be a good husband. To the outside world, he and his wife, Rachel, were the picture of a perfect couple. They laughed together, hosted dinner parties, and even posted loving photos on social media. But behind that carefully curated life was a growing silence, one David had started to notice, but had never dared to question. That silence would soon be shattered, and what he'd uncover would send shockwaves through everything he thought he knew. Rachel had changed over the past few months. She stayed out later than usual, had sudden work trips, and her phone never left her side. David didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious husband reading into everything, but the doubt started to gnaw at him. Every time she avoided eye contact or brushed off a question, the pit in his stomach grew deeper. Still, he told himself he was just overthinking it. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe she needed space. But then came the night he found a strange receipt tucked into her coat pocket, one for a hotel downtown, on a night she'd told him she was at a friend's house. That was when David decided he couldn't ignore it any longer. He needed answers. He started checking old messages, noticing patterns, watching how she moved, how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. What he didn't expect was how fast everything would start to unravel once he looked a little closer. One evening, when Rachel said she was going to a late meeting, David followed her. What he found would make his heart drop. She wasn't at any meeting. She was with someone else, laughing, holding hands, looking at that man the way she used to look at David. The betrayal stung. But David didn't confront her right away. He knew that whatever was happening wasn't just a one-time mistake. Something darker was going on, something she was hiding. And he was right, because as he dug deeper, he stumbled across a secret Rachel had been keeping for years, one that went beyond just infidelity. One that involved lies, manipulation, and a twisted plan that could have cost David everything. Now, David has a choice to make. Does he expose Rachel's dark secret and risk turning his whole life upside down? Or does he play the long game, waiting for the right moment to let karma do what it always does, strike back when you least expect it? Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. And it hits exactly where it hurts the most. What David does next, a broken bar, will leave you speechless. David didn't sleep much that night. He sat in the dark living room, phone in hand, staring at the photo he had secretly taken of Rachel and the other man. His heart raced, not with anger just yet, but with disbelief. How long had this been going on? And who was this guy? He wasn't someone David recognized from Rachel's circle, and that only made things more confusing. The way she looked at him, comfortable, familiar, told David this wasn't new. There was history there. And maybe, just maybe, that history included lies Rachel had been feeding him for much longer than he thought. He began replaying moments from the past. Times Rachel had cancelled plans last minute, days she'd come home distant or emotionally checked out. All the odd little things that didn't seem important at the time now began to line up like puzzle pieces. But what made David's stomach turn wasn't just the cheating, it was the growing sense that Rachel had been two completely different people all along. There was the wife he thought he knew, and then there was the version of her he was only now starting to uncover. David couldn't shake a strange feeling that this wasn't just about another man. Something deeper was going on. When he tried to search the name from the hotel receipt, nothing came up. No job profiles, no social media, nothing. It was like the man didn't exist. That only added more questions to David's list. Why was she being so secretive? And why go through so much effort to hide not just the affair, but this man's entire identity? The next few days were a blur. Rachel carried on as if everything was normal. She kissed David goodbye in the morning, texted him casually throughout the day, and acted like the loving wife he used to believe she was. But now, every smile she gave him felt rehearsed. Every word out of her mouth made him wonder what was real and what was just part of her act. David played along, but inside, his mind was racing. He knew he needed to be smart. If he pushed too hard, too fast, she might shut down or worse, cover her tracks. So instead, he started digging carefully. He checked their shared accounts, noticed strange transfers, and saw there were withdrawals from a bank account he didn't even know existed. And then, tucked in a folder deep in her email, he found a trail of messages that weren't just about Love Wallace. They hinted at something far more dangerous. Something that made David realize this wasn't just about a cheating wife. It was about a secret Rachel had been hiding for years. A secret that could destroy everything. And just when David thought he'd seen it all, one message changed everything. A name from Rachel's past to one he thought was long gone popped up in a way that made his blood run cold. The name in the email, Mark Langlia, was like a ghost from a past David barely remembered. Years ago, Rachel had briefly mentioned an ex-boyfriend from college, someone she said ended badly and was best left in the past. David never pressed for details. He respected her boundaries. But now, seeing his name tied to private conversations and financial transfers, he couldn't ignore it. What was Mark doing back in her life? And more importantly, what did he want? David dug deeper, carefully tracing the emails. They weren't romantic or not exactly. They were vague, coded, like two people planning something risky and not wanting to leave a trail. One thread mentioned an agreement, another referenced final steps, and several hinted at a payout of money David had no idea was even missing. His heart pounded with every click. This wasn't just an affair. It looked like Rachel was involved in something bigger, something shady. At the same time, David started noticing changes in people around him. His co-worker Jill, who'd always been friendly, suddenly grew distant. A mutual friend of his and Rachel's stopped replying to texts. It was like the world around him was shifting without his knowledge, and people knew more than they were letting on. Were they in on it, or were they protecting Rachel? Meanwhile, Rachel carried on as if nothing had changed. But now David was watching everything, every slip of the tongue, every strange phone call, every excuse. He began to suspect that Mark wasn't the only one from her past still lingering in her life. And whatever Rachel and Mark were planning, David knew he had to get ahead of it before it was too late. But then, one night, a letter showed up at their front door, a no-return address, just David's name in bold ink. What was inside a broken bar would raise even more questions. David held the letter in his hands, his fingers trembling slightly as he tore it open. The paper inside was thin, typed, and unsigned. No explanation, no greeting, just a single line: "You don't know the whole truth. She's not who you think she is." That was it. But somehow, it hit harder than any photograph or email he'd found. Someone out there knew what was going on. Someone was watching. And they wanted him to know that this web of lies was deeper than he imagined. The walls felt like they were closing in. David started to second-guess everything. Was this just about money and betrayal, or was there something even darker? Why had Rachel hidden the old bank account? Why was Mark involved after all these years? And who sent the letter? He didn't know who to trust anymore. Even his closest friend, Greg, who he tried to confide in, gave him a strange look when David mentioned Mark's name. "I thought he was dead," Greg said quietly, before brushing it off like it was nothing. That night, David stayed up in the garage, combing through more of Rachel's emails and files. A hidden folder caught his eye, password protected and buried deep. He guessed the code on the third dryer. It was his birthday. Inside were scanned documents, legal papers, and something that made his heart stop: a forged signature. His own, on something he had never seen before. The document linked him to a business he didn't own, a transaction he never approved, and a debt he didn't know existed. It was clearer if things went bad, all the blame would fall on him. At that moment, a car pulled into the driveway. It was well past midnight. Rachel wasn't supposed to be home. But she wasn't alone. David froze, the folder still open on his laptop, the screen casting a pale glow across the garage. Through the slats of the blinds, he saw Rachel step out of the car. But it wasn't Mark with her. It was someone else, older, well-dressed, and clearly not that by accident. The two of them walked toward the house with urgency, their hushed voices carrying just enough for David to hear fragments. Words like documents, timeline, and he doesn't suspect yet. Every muscle in David's body tensed. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just a friend. He was part of whatever Rachel was hiding. and it was all happening under David's roof. David shut the laptop and quietly crept toward the back entrance. He knew he didn't have long. He needed to know what they were saying without being seen. As he eased the door open, he heard Rachel mention something that stopped him cold, his name being brought up not as a husband, but as a liability. "If he talks to anyone, this all falls apart," she whispered. "Everything is in his name. He has no idea what he's sitting on." Then came the second twist. The man replied, "You better hope he doesn't recognize me. If he connects the dots back to that night in Phoenix, we're all done." David's breath caught. Phoenix. That was over 6 years ago, a trip Rachel had taken alone, back when they were newly married. She told him it was for a conference. But now, hearing that word again, and in this context, everything shifted. Whatever had happened in Phoenix wasn't just a memory, it was the beginning of something bigger, something that had been planned for years. Suddenly, David understood, this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a setup. He was the cover, the fall guy, the one left holding the bag when things went south. The fake business, the missing money, the forged documents, they were all pieces in a plan he wasn't meant to survive. And now, with Mark possibly not the only ghost from Rachel's past, David realized he was already caught in something far more dangerous than infidelity. As he backed away from the door, trying not to make a sound, a voice came from behind him. "You weren't supposed to see any of this, David." He turned around and everything changed in an instant. David spun around, heart pounding in his chest. Standing behind him in a garage doorway was Rachel, her face pale but unreadable. Her tone was calm, too calm. "You shouldn't have followed me," she said quietly, as if scolding a child. "But I guess it was only a matter of time." David didn't move. His mind was racing, trying to piece it all together. "Who is that man?" "What happened in Phoenix?" he asked, barely keeping his voice steady. Rachel sighed, as if the weight of years had just settled on her shoulders. "His name is Andrew. He's not just some guy I met recently, he's a lawyer." "And Phoenix a broken bar? That's when everything started." "I made a mistake, David. A big one. I got involved with people I shouldn't have. I thought I could fix it before it got out of hand. But then we got married, and it was easier to let you believe the lie than explain the truth." "The fake company?" David asked. "The forged documents? Was any of this real?" Rachel looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't plan for it to be like this. At first, I just needed a way out, a clean slate. But then they offered me a deal, wipe my debts clean, make a fresh start. All I had to do was put things in your name. You'd never know, they said." David felt sick. "So you used me?" Her silence was all the answer he needed. Then, footsteps came from behind her. Andrew stepped into view, holding a folder. David's folder, the one from the laptop. "We can still make this right," Andrew said. "But we need you to disappear for a while. Take the fall quietly. In a year, you'll have a new name, a new life." David stared at them both, stunned. "You really think I'm just going to vanish?" Rachel took a step forward. "It's not like you have a choice. Everything's already tied to you." But then came the final twist. David slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small recorder. "I do have a choice," he said. "And I've been recording everything since you stepped out of that car." Rachel's face drained of color. Andrew swore under his breath. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. David had made one call before going into the garage, and now, karma was knocking. The sirens grew louder, washing over the quiet neighborhood like a final warning. David stood firm, his recorder still in hand, while Rachel and Andrew scrambled to figure out what was happening. But it was too late. The police were already pulling into the driveway, lights flashing, casting their shadows across years of secrets and lies. Rachel looked at David one last time, eyes filled with something between regret and resignation. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. David didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence between them said everything. The officers stepped into the garage, and within moments, Rachel and Andrew were separated, questioned, and placed in handcuffs. As they were led away, David felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: sadness, relief, anger, but also clarity. The truth was finally out. In the days that followed, The investigation confirmed what David had feared. Rachel had used him as a financial shield in a web of fraud and deception stretching back years. The company he supposedly owned didn't exist, but the debts in his name were real. Luckily, with the recordings, the emails, and Rachel's own confession, authorities were able to clear David of legal responsibility. His name would be cleared, but the emotional damage wasn't so easy to fix. He spent the next few weeks trying to rebuild closing fake accounts, talking to lawyers, and facing the reality of how easily trust can be shattered. Friends who once admired his perfect marriage now looked at him with sympathy. But in time, sympathy turned into support. And slowly, David started to find peace. The biggest lesson, he realized, wasn't just about betrayal. It was about awareness, about paying attention when something feels off, about trusting your gut, even when the truth is painful. Because secrets have a way of surfacing, and karma always finds its way home. David eventually moved out of the house, started fresh in a quiet apartment across town, and left the past behind. The wounds were still there, but so was a new sense of strength. He didn't need revenge. He had the truth. And in the end, that was enough. Sometimes, the biggest betrayal leads to the deepest clarity. And when the lies fall apart, the only thing left standing a broken bar is what's real.